Some deliveries arrive exactly when they're supposed to, even when they're completely wrong. Marcus Thompson thought he was getting Chinese takeout at 3 in the morning. Instead, he got a woman with tear-stained cheeks and a story that would change everything he thought he knew about coincidence, fate, and the strange mathematics of human connection. What happened next didn't just feed his family, it fed his soul. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the kitchen window like an impatient debt collector, each drop demanding attention Marcus Thompson couldn't afford to give. The digital clock on the microwave glowed an accusatory 2:47 a.m., its red numbers cutting through the darkness of his modest apartment with the precision of a guilt-laden conscience. He stood at the counter in boxers and a faded Ohio State t-shirt. 3 empty coffee mugs forming a triangle around his laptop, each one a monument to another sleepless night spent chasing deadlines that seemed to multiply like rabbits. The freelance, graphic design work that once felt like creative freedom now felt more like creative purgatory. Every project brief blurred into the next. Every client revision chipped away at his sanity, and every payment that arrived 2 weeks late chipped away at his ability to keep the lights on. Marcus rubbed his bloodshot eyes and stared at the screen, where a logo for a pet grooming business mocked him with its unfinished edges and color scheme that looked like a unicorn had exploded in a paint factory. His stomach growled with the persistence of a chainsaw trying to start, reminding him that his last meal had been a gas station sandwich sometime around noon yesterday. The refrigerator hummed its empty song from across the kitchen, a mechanical lullaby he'd grown tired of hearing. Inside, he knew, waited the usual suspects: expired milk that had achieved the consistency of cottage cheese, leftover pizza that had hardened into something resembling cardboard, and condiment packets hoarded from various fast food establishments, like treasures from a bygone era of financial stability. The apartment itself seemed to sag under the weight of single parenthood and economic uncertainty. Toys scattered across the living room floor created an obstacle course that Marcus had learned to navigate in the dark. Crayon drawings covered the lower half of every wall, a colorful testament to his 8-year-old daughter Emma's artistic ambitions and his own inability to say no when she asked for more paper. The couch bore the permanent indentation of his body from countless nights spent working while she slept. Its once navy fabric, now a mottled gray that matched his mood most days. Marcus glanced toward the hallway, where Emma's bedroom door stood slightly ajar, the way she insisted it remain every night. He could hear her soft breathing, the sound that had become his compass in the storm of raising a child alone. She'd gone to bed without dinner again, claiming she wasn't hungry, but he'd seen the way she'd eyed the empty pantry when she thought he wasn't looking. At 8 years old, she'd already learned the mathematics of scarcity, the way children do when they love their parents too much to ask for things they know can't be afforded. The laptop screen dimmed as he stared into space, lost in the familiar spiral of worry that accompanied his late-night work sessions. Rent was due in 5 days. Emma needed new shoes because her current pair had developed holes that let in every puddle and promise of embarrassment at school. The electric bill sat unopened on the counter, its presence as ominous as a storm cloud that refused to rain. He'd been putting off opening it for 3 days, as if ignorance could somehow make the numbers inside more manageable. His phone buzzed against the counter, jolting him back to the present. The notification glowed with false cheerfulness. "Your DoorDash order is being prepared." He stared at the message with the confusion of a man who'd forgotten ordering food, which, given his current mental state, wasn't entirely impossible. Marcus opened the app and scrolled through recent orders, finding nothing placed tonight. The last order showed 3 days ago, a modest dinner he'd split with Emma when a client. Payment had briefly made such luxuries possible. Another buzz. Your order is out for delivery. Estimated arrival, 15 minutes. Marcus frowned at the screen, his tired brain struggling to process this information. He hadn't ordered anything, couldn't afford to order anything, and certainly hadn't authorized any charges to his already strained bank account. Panic crept up his spine as he opened his banking app, fingers trembling slightly as he navigated to recent transactions. The last charge was from 2 days ago, gas for his aging Honda Civic that consumed oil like a small industrial machine. The rain continued its assault on the window, creating a soundtrack of white noise that usually helped him concentrate, but tonight felt more like nature's way of emphasizing his isolation. The apartment building around him slept the sleep of people with regular schedules and predictable lives, their silence a reminder of how far outside the normal world his existence had drifted. Night had become his companion, deadline pressure his motivator, and caffeine his life support system. Marcus closed the laptop and padded to the living room window, peering through the blinds at the empty street below. The parking lot glistened under the sickly yellow glow of sodium lights, each puddle reflecting the illumination like scattered coins. His neighborhood wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't the kind of place where mistaken deliveries happened often. Most of the residents were shift workers, elderly folks on fixed incomes, or single parents like himself who'd learned that pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. The building itself told the story of dreams deferred and expectations adjusted. Built in the 70s with all the architectural ambition of a cardboard box, it had aged into something that wasn't quite run down, but certainly wasn't thriving. The hallway carpet bore stains that spoke of children, pets, and the occasional domestic crisis. The elevator worked sporadically, and the mailboxes in the lobby hung slightly askew, like crooked teeth in an otherwise acceptable smile. His phone buzzed again. "Your driver is approaching." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Whatever was coming, he'd have to deal with it. He grabbed his wallet from the counter, checking its contents with the thoroughness of an archaeologist examining ancient artifacts. $37 in cash, enough to cover a modest order if he absolutely had to, though the thought of spending money he didn't have made his chest tighten with familiar anxiety. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside grew closer, accompanied by the rustling of what sounded like multiple bags. Marcus positioned himself by the door, ear pressed against the wood, listening as the steps slowed and stopped directly outside his apartment. A soft knock followed, barely audible above the rain that continued to pepper his windows. He opened the door to find a young woman in a rain-soaked DoorDash jacket standing in the hallway, her dark hair plastered to her head and her hands clutching several bags that smelled like heaven and looked like his salvation. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with the kind of exhausted smile that suggested this wasn't her first late-night delivery and wouldn't be her last. "Order for Thompson?" she asked, consulting her phone with water droplets still clinging to the screen. Marcus stared at the bags, his stomach responding to the aroma with embarrassing enthusiasm. The smell of garlic and herbs wafted up from the containers, making his mouth water despite his confusion. "I didn't order anything," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The universe had a way of testing him lately, and he'd learned to question his own memory when stress reached certain levels. The driver, whose name tag read Jessica, frowned at her phone and then at the apartment number beside his door. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This is apartment 4B, right? Marcus Thompson? "Yes, but I really didn't order anything. There must be some mistake." Jessica shifted the bags to one arm and scrolled through her phone with increasing confusion. The order was placed at 2:15 a.m., paid for with a card ending in 3847. Special instructions say to deliver to apartment 4B and tell Marcus Thompson that someone has been waiting since 2010. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, causing him to step backward into his apartment. Jessica noticed his reaction and tilted her head with concern. "You okay, sir? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus gripped the doorframe for support, his mind racing through possibilities and coming up empty. The number 2010 meant something, had to mean something, but his exhausted brain couldn't quite grasp what. It hung in his consciousness like a word on the tip of his tongue, familiar yet frustratingly elusive. "The card number," he managed. "You said it ended in 3847. Jessica nodded, holding up her phone so he could see the order details. The name on the payment showed as Sarah Chen, but the delivery address was definitely his apartment. The order itself was substantial. Enough Chinese food to feed a family, complete with appetizers, entrees and desserts that would have cost more than Marcus typically spent on groceries in a week. "I don't know any Sarah Chen," Marcus said, though even as the words left his mouth, something stirred in his memory, a fragment of recognition, like trying to remember a song by humming only a few notes. Jessica checked her phone again, then looked back at Marcus with growing sympathy. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but someone paid for this food to be delivered to you specifically. The tip alone was $50, and the special instructions were pretty clear. Maybe it's from a friend who wanted to help out." Marcus considered this possibility, running through his limited social circle in his mind. His parents lived across the country and barely scraped by themselves. His ex-wife had remarried and moved to California, their relationship now reduced to awkward phone calls about Emma's schedule and school events. He had work acquaintances, but no one close enough to send anonymous food deliveries in the middle of the night. The rain continued to fall, creating a steady rhythm against the windows that seemed to emphasize the surreal nature of the situation. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in the hallway, water still dripping from her jacket onto the worn carpet below. The bags in her arms smelled increasingly appetizing, and Marcus realized that regardless of the mystery surrounding their origin, refusing them wouldn't solve anything. "You know what?" Marcus said, reaching for his wallet. "Let me give you something for the trouble. This is obviously some kind of mix-up, but you shouldn't have to suffer for it." Jessica waved away his offer. The tip was already included, and honestly, this is the weirdest delivery I've ever made, but also kind of the nicest. Someone really wanted you to have this food. Maybe just enjoy it and figure out the mystery later. She handed him the bags, and Marcus felt their weight in his arms, like an anchor to reality. The food was still warm, the containers carefully packed with the attention to detail that spoke of someone who cared about presentation. As Jessica turned to leave, she paused and looked back at him. "For what it's worth," she said, "whoever sent this really went out of their way to make sure you got it." The order was placed with specific timing requests and detailed instructions. Someone wanted you to know they were thinking about you. After Jessica disappeared down the hallway, Marcus closed the door and stood in his kitchen holding the bags, like they contained evidence of an elaborate prank. The smell of the food filled his small apartment, transforming the space from a monument to struggle into something that felt briefly abundant. He set the bags on the counter and began unpacking, them with the careful attention of someone defusing a bomb. Inside, he found a feast that defied logic: sweet and sour chicken, beef with broccoli, fried rice, egg rolls, wonton soup, and even fortune cookies. Each container was labeled with neat handwriting that wasn't his own, and the portions were clearly meant for more than one person. At the bottom of the final bag, he discovered something that made his hands shake. A small envelope, cream-colored and expensive-looking, with his name written across the front in handwriting that sent electricity shooting through his nervous system. The penmanship was unmistakable, though he hadn't seen it in over a decade. Marcus sank into one of his kitchen chairs. the envelope feeling like it weighed more than all the food combined. His mind raced backward through the years, searching for context and finding fragments of memory that didn't quite fit together. Sarah Chen, the name echoed in his consciousness with increasing insistence, demanding recognition. 2010, the year that felt like a lifetime ago, when his life had followed a completely different trajectory and the future had seemed like something to anticipate rather than endure. Marcus turned the envelope over in his hands, noting the quality of the paper and the care with which his name had been written. This wasn't a casual gesture or a random act of kindness. Someone had planned this carefully, timing the delivery for the middle of the night when he'd be awake and alone, when the gesture would have maximum impact. The rain against the window seemed to soften, or perhaps his attention had turned so completely inward that external sounds faded into background noise. He thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware that their small world had just been touched by something inexplicable. Tomorrow, she would wake up to the smell of leftover Chinese food and probably assume he'd finally given in to one of his late-night cravings. Marcus opened the envelope with the reverence of someone handling a historical document. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper, folded once, with writing that confirmed what his heart had already begun to suspect. The handwriting belonged to someone from his past, someone he'd thought about more often than he'd ever admitted, even to himself. The letter was brief, just a few lines that managed to compress years of wondering into a few carefully chosen sentences. As Marcus read, the kitchen around him seemed to shift and change, the familiar becoming foreign, the impossible becoming inevitable. The words on the page weren't just communication, they were a bridge across time, stretching from a version of himself he'd almost forgotten to the man he'd become through necessity and circumstance. Outside, the rain began to slow, as if the weather itself recognized that something fundamental had shifted in apartment 4B. Marcus read the letter twice, then a third time, each reading revealing new layers of meaning and implication. The food, growing cold on his counter, seemed less important now than the questions multiplying in his mind. The letter mentioned 2010 specifically, referencing events and decisions that had shaped the trajectory of his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. It spoke of waiting, of watching from a distance, of choices made and opportunities missed. Most importantly, it contained information that would require him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about coincidence, and the possibility that some connections transcend time and distance. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, his hands steadier now than they'd been in months. Whatever was happening, whoever had orchestrated this midnight delivery had just reminded him that his story was larger than his current circumstances. The food on his counter represented more than nutrition. It represented possibility, connection, and the strange mathematics of human caring that operated according to rules he'd never fully understood. He stood up from the chair and walked to Emma's bedroom door, peering in at his sleeping daughter. She lay curled under her favorite blanket, the one with unicorns that she'd insisted on keeping despite outgrowing its childish design. In the dim light from the hallway, her face looked peaceful, untroubled by the adult concerns that kept him awake most nights. Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its simplicity. Tomorrow, he would start making phone calls. Tonight, however, he would eat the food that someone had cared enough to send, and he would allow himself to believe that the universe occasionally operated with a kindness that defied rational explanation. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind the clean, washed smell that accompanied fresh beginnings. Marcus returned to the kitchen and began dividing the food into portions, saving some for Emma's breakfast and setting aside enough for several meals. As he ate, he found himself thinking not about the mystery of the delivery's origin, but about the strange comfort of knowing that somewhere in the world, someone had been thinking about him at exactly the moment when he needed to know that most. The fortune cookie lay unopened beside his plate, its message waiting like a promise he wasn't quite ready to unwrap. But for the first time in months, Marcus Thompson felt like a man who might actually want to know what the future held. The night that had begun with deadline pressure and financial anxiety had transformed into something else entirely, a reminder that life possessed depths and dimensions he'd forgotten to consider. Outside his window, the city settled into the quiet hours before dawn, unaware that in apartment 4B, a single father was discovering that some deliveries arrive exactly when they're needed most, even when they're completely wrong. The woman who had orchestrated this moment remained a mystery, but her message was becoming clearer with each bite of food and each moment of unexpected hope. Marcus finished eating and carefully stored the remaining food, already imagining Emma's surprise when she discovered their sudden abundance. The letter lay on the counter beside him, its presence both comforting and challenging, a reminder that his past contained connections he'd thought were lost forever. Whatever happened next, whoever Sarah Chen turned out to be, had already given him something he hadn't realized he was missing, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had been holding space for him in their heart. The apartment felt different, now less like a monument to struggle and more like a place where miracles might occasionally stop by for a visit. Marcus cleaned the dishes with more care than usual, as if the simple act of washing containers that had held such unexpected kindness deserved special attention. When he finally returned to his laptop, the logo that had seemed impossible to finish earlier now appeared manageable, even inviting. He worked until dawn, more productively than he had in weeks, fueled not just by Chinese food, but by the strange energy that comes from being reminded that the world contains more mystery and kindness than our daily circumstances usually reveal. As the sun began to rise over his neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of possibility, Marcus Thompson closed his laptop and prepared to face a day that felt fundamentally different from the one that had preceded it. The letter from Sarah Chen remained on his counter, its secrets still largely intact, but its impact already transformative. Whatever revelations the coming hours would bring, Marcus faced them with the confidence of a man who had been reminded that he was not as alone in the world as he had begun to believe. The wrong delivery had become exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, a reminder that some mistakes are actually invitations to discover that the universe operates with a mathematics of caring that defies conventional logic. Emma would wake soon, and with her awakening would come questions about the sudden appearance of enough Chinese food to feed a small army. Marcus found himself looking forward to those questions, to the opportunity to tell his daughter that sometimes the world surprises us with kindness when we least expect it, but most need it. The story of the midnight delivery would become part of their family narrative, a reminder that their small world was connected to larger forces of compassion and care. As morning light filled his kitchen, Marcus Thompson stood at his window and watched his neighborhood wake up. The building around him remained the same structure of dreams deferred and expectations adjusted, but his place within it had shifted. He was no longer just a single father struggling to make ends meet. He was also a man whose past had reached across time to remind him that some connections transcend distance and circumstance. The day ahead held the promise of answers, of phone calls that might solve the mystery of Sarah Chen and the significance of 2010. But for now, it was enough to know that somewhere in the world, someone had been waiting since that pivotal year to reach out and touch his life with unexpected grace. The wrong delivery had delivered exactly what he needed: hope, sustenance, and the radical reminder that he mattered enough for someone to orchestrate such an elaborate act of caring. Marcus smiled as he prepared coffee for the first time in days that didn't taste like desperation and exhaustion. Whatever else the day might bring, it would begin with the knowledge that miracles sometimes arrive in takeout containers, delivered by rain-soaked young women who understand that some orders are about more than food. The mystery of Sarah Chen would unfold in its own time, but the gift of her caring had already begun its work of transformation, turning a night of deadline pressure into a morning of unexpected possibility. Emma's bare feet padded across the kitchen linoleum with the deliberate stealth of a child who had learned to move quietly through a house where someone worked nights. Her strawberry blonde hair stuck up at impossible angles, defying gravity and any attempt at morning grooming, while her oversized pajamas bearing faded cartoon characters hung loose on her small frame. She stopped short when she reached the kitchen doorway, her green eyes widening at the sight of multiple Chinese food containers arranged across the counter, like an altar to abundance. Marcus looked up from his coffee cup, noting the way Emma's expression shifted from sleepy confusion to careful hope. At 8 years old, she had already developed the emotional armor that children of struggling families learn to wear, the ability to want things quietly, so disappointment wouldn't echo through a house already crowded with adult worries. She approached the counter with the cautious reverence of someone approaching a mirage in the desert. "Did we win something?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the whisper-soft quality it took on when she was afraid of breaking whatever magic had brought good fortune to their kitchen. She stood on her tiptoes to peer into the containers, her nose twitching at the unfamiliar but appealing aromas that filled their small space. Marcus set down his coffee cup and knelt to Emma's eye level, a gesture that had become their morning ritual whenever important conversations needed to happen. Her face was still puffy with sleep, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence that reminded him daily of her mother's analytical mind and her own emerging personality that somehow remained optimistic despite their circumstances. "Someone sent us food," Marcus explained, choosing his words carefully. "A woman named Sarah Chen. I'm not sure why yet, but she wanted to make sure we had enough to eat." Emma processed this information with the seriousness of a diplomat considering international treaties. She reached out tentatively and touched one of the containers, as if testing whether it was real or simply an elaborate dream her hungry subconscious had constructed. The warmth of the food seemed to convince her of its authenticity, and a genuine smile began to spread across her face. "Is she like a food fairy?" Emma asked, settling on an explanation that made sense within her understanding of how the world occasionally delivered unexpected kindness. "Mrs. Patterson next door says sometimes angels come disguised as regular people to help when things get hard." Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen at his daughter's innocent interpretation. Mrs. Patterson was an elderly widow who had taken a protective interest in Emma, occasionally inviting her over for tea and cookies when she sensed that their household supplies were running particularly low. Her gentle faith and practical kindness had provided Emma with a framework for understanding that goodness sometimes appeared without logical explanation. "Maybe something like that," Marcus agreed, not wanting to disrupt Emma's sense of wonder. With the more complicated adult reality of his confusion, she definitely wanted us to have a good breakfast. They ate together at their small kitchen table, Emma chattering excitedly about the different flavors, while Marcus found himself studying her animated face. The joy she took in the unexpected feast reminded him that children possessed an ability to embrace good fortune without questioning its origins or worrying about its sustainability. She savored each bite with the focused attention of someone who understood that abundance was temporary and therefore deserved complete appreciation. After breakfast, Marcus walked Emma to the school bus stop 3 blocks away, their usual morning routine now infused with the lingering contentment that comes from starting the day with full stomachs. Emma skipped ahead occasionally, turning back to wave at him with the exuberance of someone whose world had expanded overnight. Other children waited at the bus stop with the resigned patience of those heading toward another day of institutional learning, but Emma bounced on her toes with unusual energy. "Dad," Emma said as the school bus rounded the corner, its yellow bulk moving with the determined reliability of public education transportation. "When you figure out who the food lady is, will you tell her thank you from me too?" Marcus nodded, watching as Emma climbed the bus steps and found her usual seat near the front. Through the window, she pressed her small hand against the glass and grinned at him with the kind of smile that could power small cities. As the bus pulled away, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders, but it felt different now, less crushing and more purposeful. The walk back to his apartment gave Marcus time to think about the phone calls he needed to make. Sarah Chen remained a mystery that demanded investigation, and 2010 was a year that required excavation from the buried layers of his memory. He thought about the path his life had taken since then, the decisions and circumstances that had led him from whatever connection he'd had with this woman to his current situation as a single father working through the night to keep his family afloat. Back in his apartment, Marcus retrieved the letter from the kitchen counter and read it again, searching for clues he might have missed in his initial shock. The handwriting was definitely familiar, though he couldn't yet place exactly where he'd seen it before. The paper was expensive, suggesting someone with resources, and the careful timing of the delivery indicated thoughtful planning rather than impulsive generosity. The letter itself was brief, but loaded with emotional weight. "Marcus," it began, "I hope this finds you well. I've been following your life from a respectful distance since 2010, and I know things have been difficult lately. Please accept this small gesture as a reminder that some connections transcend time and circumstance. I've been waiting for the right moment to reach out, and something told me that moment was now. If you're willing, I would like to talk. My number is 614-555-0847. Whatever you decide, please know that you matter more than you realize. With deep affection, Sarah." Marcus stared at the phone number, recognizing the 614 area code as Columbus, Ohio, where he had attended college and spent the first few years after graduation. The recognition sent electricity through his nervous system as pieces of a long-buried puzzle began to shift into position. Sarah Chen, Columbus, 2010, all pointing toward a period of his life that he had carefully compartmentalized and stored away. He remembered now, with the sudden clarity that comes when suppressed memories finally break through to consciousness. Sarah Chen had been in his graduate program, a brilliant woman pursuing her master's degree in social work while he completed his fine arts coursework. She had been quiet, but intensely focused, the kind of person who observed everything and spoke only when she had something meaningful to contribute to discussions. Their connection had been unexpected, developing slowly over late-night sessions in the graduate student lounge where they'd found themselves studying at the same tables, sharing the comfortable silence that comes when two introverts recognize kindred spirits in each other. She had been beautiful in an understated way, with long black hair that she wore in practical ponytails and dark eyes that seemed to see through surface presentations to underlying truths. Marcus felt his hands shake slightly as more memories surfaced. Their relationship had been brief but intense, a connection that had felt significant beyond its actual duration. They had talked about their dreams, their fears, their plans for changing the world through their respective fields. Sarah had spoken passionately about working with families in crisis, about creating support systems for people who had fallen through society's cracks. The relationship had ended abruptly when Marcus received news that his father was seriously ill back in Ohio. Family obligations had pulled him away from school and from Sarah, and in the chaos of medical emergencies and financial crises, their connection had simply dissolved. He had intended to call her, to explain, to maintain contact, but life had intervened with its usual ruthless efficiency. His father had recovered, but not before Marcus had accumulated enough debt and missed enough coursework to make returning to graduate school impossible. By the time he had sorted out his family situation, Sarah had finished her degree and moved on to whatever came next in her carefully planned life. Marcus had attempted to find her through social media and mutual acquaintances, but she seemed to have vanished into the professional world of social services. Eventually, he had stopped looking, telling himself that some connections were meant to be temporary and that pursuing her would only disrupt whatever life she had built for herself. The years that followed had taken Marcus in directions he never could have predicted. Marriage to Jennifer, a woman he'd met through work, had provided stability and companionship, though never the intellectual and emotional intensity he'd shared with Sarah. Emma's birth had brought profound joy, but the marriage had slowly dissolved under the pressure of conflicting ambitions and incompatible visions of what their family should become. Jennifer's decision to pursue a career opportunity in California had effectively ended their marriage, though they'd maintained the fiction of trying to work things out for nearly 2 years afterward. The divorce had been amicable but devastating, leaving Marcus with primary custody of Emma and the challenge of rebuilding his life as a single parent in an economy that seemed designed to punish anyone who deviated from traditional family structures. Now, sitting in his kitchen with Sarah's letter in his hands, Marcus realized that she had somehow been aware of his struggles. Her reference to following his life from a distance suggested a level of attention and care that both touched and unsettled him. How long had she been watching? What had prompted her to reach out now, at precisely the moment when his resources and resilience were stretched to their breaking point? Marcus picked up his phone and stared at Sarah's number, his thumb hovering over the digits. Calling her would open a door that had been closed for over a decade, potentially inviting complications into a life that was already sufficiently complex. But not calling felt like a betrayal of the kindness she had shown, a rejection of connection that he was in no position to afford. He dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. The phone rang 3 times before a voice he recognized, despite the passage of years, answered with professional clarity. Sarah Chen speaking. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. It's Marcus Thompson. I got your delivery. The silence that followed stretched long enough for Marcus to wonder if the connection had been lost. Then Sarah spoke, and her voice carried warmth that seemed to reach across the years and touch something in his chest that had been cold for longer than he'd realized. Marcus, she said, and he could hear tears in her voice despite her obvious attempt to maintain composure. I wasn't sure you'd call. I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure. Why now? Marcus asked, cutting through the pleasantries to the question that had been burning in his mind since he'd read her letter. Why after all these years? Sarah's laugh was soft and slightly sad, the sound of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in her mind many times, but found the reality more emotionally charged than anticipated. Because I never stopped thinking about you, and because I finally reached a point in my life where I could do something about it. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Sarah's honesty demanded equal honesty in return, and he found himself speaking more openly than he had with anyone in months. Things have been difficult, he admitted. I'm barely keeping my head above water most days. Emma and we're making it work, but just barely. I know, Sarah said gently. I've been worried about you. The implications of her statement hung between them, raising questions about how much she knew and how she had acquired that knowledge. Marcus felt exposed and cared for simultaneously, an emotional combination that left him uncertain how to respond. How much do you know? He asked. Finally, Sarah's sigh was audible across the connection. Enough to know that you're working too hard for too little money, that Emma is an amazing kid who deserves more stability than your current situation can provide, and that you've been carrying the weight of single parenthood with more grace than you probably give yourself credit for. Marcus absorbed this information, trying to determine whether he should feel grateful or invaded. Sarah's knowledge of his circumstances suggested a level of attention that went beyond casual curiosity about an old friend. But her tone conveyed concern rather than judgment, care rather than pity. Are you keeping tabs on me? Marcus asked, attempting to keep his voice light, despite the seriousness of the question. I'm a social worker, Marcus, Sarah replied. Keeping track of people who matter to me is part of who I am. But I want to be clear that I've never interfered or overstepped boundaries. I've just been aware and caring from a distance. Marcus walked to his kitchen window and looked out at the parking lot where he'd watched for Sarah's delivery driver just hours earlier. The normalcy of the scene, cars and concrete and everyday life continuing its predictable patterns, seemed somehow surreal given the conversation he was having. What do you want from me? Marcus asked, not accusingly, but with the directness of someone who had learned that understanding motivations early in conversations could prevent misunderstandings later. I want to help, Sarah said simply, and I want to reconnect. If you're open to that, I have resources now that I didn't have when we were students. I have connections, knowledge, and the ability to make things easier for you and Emma if you'll let me. Marcus felt his defensive instincts activate, the pride that had carried him through years of struggle, rebelling against the suggestion that he needed rescuing. But underneath the pride was exhaustion, and underneath the exhaustion was a longing for partnership that he'd been denying for months. I don't need charity, Marcus said carefully. I'm not offering charity, Sarah replied. I'm offering friendship, support, and maybe the chance to finish a conversation that got interrupted 13 years ago. The weight of those words settled into Marcus's consciousness like seeds finding fertile ground. The conversation that had been interrupted hadn't just been about their relationship, it had been about their dreams, their plans, their visions of what their lives could become. Sarah's reappearance suggested the possibility of revisiting those abandoned futures, of finding paths forward that he hadn't been able to imagine alone. Where do we start? Marcus asked, surprised by his own willingness to engage with possibilities that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. Could we meet? Sarah asked. I'm in Cincinnati right now, about 2 hours from you. I could drive up this afternoon if you're free. Marcus thought about his work schedule, the deadlines that perpetually loomed, the careful balance he maintained between earning enough to survive and being present enough for Emma. Then he thought about the woman who had cared enough to send him food in the middle of the night, and who was now offering to drive 2 hours for a conversation that might change everything. Emma gets home from school at 3:30, Marcus said. Could you come around 4? I'd like her to meet you. I'd love to meet her, Sarah said, and Marcus could hear genuine excitement in her voice. Marcus, thank you for being willing to see me. I know this is unexpected and I appreciate your openness. After they hung up, Marcus stood in his kitchen surrounded by the containers of food that had started this entire chain of events. The apartment felt different now, charged with anticipation and possibility. In a few hours, Sarah Chen would walk through his door, bringing with her the accumulated weight of 13 years of separation and the potential for connection that might reshape his understanding of what his future could hold. Marcus spent the rest of the morning cleaning his apartment with the focused intensity of someone preparing for an important inspection. He picked up Emma's toys, organized the scattered papers from his work projects, and attempted to create an environment that suggested competence rather than desperation. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the version of himself that Sarah had known in graduate school, the young man with artistic ambitions and naive confidence that the world would eventually recognize his talent and reward his efforts. That version of Marcus felt like a different person now, separated from his current self by years of compromise and adjustment. But as the afternoon approached, he began to feel stirrings of that earlier identity, as if Sarah's impending arrival was calling forward aspects of his personality that had been dormant but not dead. Emma's arrival home from school brought a burst of energy and curiosity that helped focus Marcus's nervous anticipation. She chatted about her day while eating leftover Chinese food, her excitement about their morning abundance still evident in her animated descriptions of how her friends had reacted when she told them about their mysterious benefactor. "Is the food lady really coming to visit?" Emma asked, demonstrating the way children cut through adult complexities to focus on essential facts. "Her name is Sarah, and yes, she's coming to visit," Marcus confirmed. "She's an old friend of mine from before you were born." Emma considered this information with the seriousness she applied to all matters involving her father's past. She had few details about Marcus's life before her birth, and she approached each new revelation like an archaeologist uncovering artifacts from an ancient civilization. "Was she your girlfriend?" Emma asked with the directness that made adult conversations with 8-year-olds both delightful and terrifying. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as he considered how to answer honestly without creating unrealistic expectations. "We were friends who cared about each other very much," he said finally. "We lost touch when life got complicated, but she never forgot about us." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "I hope she's nice," she said, "and I hope she likes kids." At exactly 4 p.m., a soft knock echoed through the apartment. Marcus opened the door to find Sarah Chen standing in his hallway, and the years collapsed between them like an accordion closing. She looked fundamentally the same, despite the passage of time, though her dark hair was now cut in a professional bob and her clothing suggested success and stability. Her eyes held the same intelligent warmth he remembered, and when she smiled, Marcus felt something in his chest that had been frozen begin to thaw. "Hello, Marcus," Sarah said, her voice carrying emotions too complex for simple greeting. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus replied, stepping aside to let her enter his modest apartment. "Welcome to our home." Sarah stepped inside and looked around with the observant gaze of someone trained to assess family environments. Marcus watched her take in the scattered toys, the artwork covering the lower walls, the general sense of controlled chaos that characterized life with an 8-year-old. Her expression showed no judgment, only interest, and what appeared to be approval. Emma appeared in the living room doorway with the dramatic timing that children seem to instinctively understand, and Marcus felt a moment of pure parental pride as he watched Sarah's face light up at the sight of his daughter. "You must be Emma," Sarah said, kneeling to Emma's eye level in a gesture that demonstrated immediate understanding of how to interact with children. "I've heard wonderful things about you." Emma approached with the careful confidence of a child who had been taught to be polite to adults, but who reserved judgment until she could assess their character. She studied Sarah's face with the intensity of someone conducting an important interview. "Are you really the food lady?" Emma asked. Sarah laughed, and the sound filled Marcus's apartment with warmth he hadn't realized had been missing. "I am really the food lady," she confirmed. "Did you enjoy breakfast?" "It was the best breakfast ever," Emma declared with the absolute certainty that children bring to superlative statements. "Dad said you're his friend from before I was born." "That's right," Sarah said. "Your dad and I went to school together, and we used to talk about all the amazing things we wanted to do when we grew up. I think he's done some pretty amazing things, especially having such a wonderful daughter." Emma beamed at the compliment, and Marcus felt something ease in his chest as he watched his daughter warm to Sarah's presence. Emma had always been cautious around new adults, a trait that Marcus attributed to the instability of their living situation and her awareness of their financial struggles. But something about Sarah's manner seemed to immediately put Emma at ease. "Do you want to see my drawings?" Emma asked, extending an invitation that she rarely offered to strangers. "I would love to see your drawings," Sarah replied with enthusiasm that seemed entirely genuine. Marcus watched as Emma led Sarah to the living room wall where her artwork was displayed, chattering excitedly about each piece. Sarah listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that children's art revealed important information about their inner lives and emotional states. She asked thoughtful questions about Emma's techniques and inspirations, treating the 8-year-old like a serious artist whose work deserved respectful consideration. As Emma explained her drawing of their apartment building, complete with stick figure representations of herself and Marcus in the window, Sarah glanced at Marcus with an expression that conveyed both admiration and concern. He could see her, processing the evidence of their life together, the signs of financial constraint balanced against the obvious love and creativity that filled their small space. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "would you mind playing in your room for a little while so Sarah and I can talk?" Emma nodded with the understanding of someone who had learned that adult conversations sometimes required privacy. "Can Sarah stay for dinner?" she asked hopefully. Marcus looked at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. "I'd love to stay for dinner if that's okay with your dad." After Emma disappeared into her room, Marcus and Sarah settled on his couch with cups of coffee that Marcus had prepared with unusual care. The apartment felt different with Sarah in it, somehow both smaller and larger, as if her presence had shifted the proportions of his familiar space. "She's incredible," Sarah said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "You've done an amazing job raising her." Marcus felt the weight of single parenthood acknowledgement settle around him like a comfortable blanket. Praise for his parenting was rare and precious, especially from someone whose professional expertise gave her opinions additional credibility. "Thank you," Marcus said. "She's the best thing I've ever done, even if I feel like I'm failing her most days." "You're not failing her," Sarah said firmly. "Marcus, I've worked with hundreds of families over the years, and I can tell within minutes whether a child feels loved and secure. Emma radiates confidence and joy. That doesn't happen by accident." They talked for the next 2 hours, filling in the gaps that 13 years had created between them. Sarah described her career trajectory, her work with families in crisis, her gradual climb through the social services bureaucracy to her current position as a regional director for a non-profit organization focused on family stability. Marcus shared his own journey, the detours and disappointments that had led him from artistic ambitions to freelance graphic design, from marriage to single parenthood. As they talked, Marcus began to understand how Sarah had maintained awareness of his life. Her professional network included connections to various social services agencies, and his family's occasional interactions with school counselors and community support programs had created a paper trail that someone with Sarah's skills and connections could follow without violating privacy laws or ethical boundaries. "I want to be clear about something," Sarah said as their conversation deepened. "I didn't reach out because I felt sorry for you. I reached out because I never stopped caring about you, and because I finally reached a point in my life where I could act on that caring without compromising my professional responsibilities. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of the pity or condescension that he'd learned to recognize and deflect. Instead, he saw warmth, respect, and something that looked very much like the affection they'd shared as graduate students. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked. What kind of help are you talking about?" Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more focused and professional. "I have several ideas, but I want to discuss them with you rather than impose solutions. I know a program that provides stable housing assistance for single parents. I have connections with employers who offer flexible work arrangements for people with your skills. And I have resources that could help with Emma's education and enrichment opportunities." Marcus felt his defensive instincts activate again, the pride that had sustained him through years of struggle, resisting the implication that he couldn't provide adequately for his daughter. But underneath the defensiveness was exhaustion. And underneath the exhaustion was a growing recognition that accepting help didn't necessarily mean admitting failure. "I don't want to be anyone's charity case," Marcus said carefully. "You wouldn't be," Sarah replied. "These aren't handouts, Marcus. They're programs and opportunities that you and Emma qualify for based on your circumstances and your strengths. I'm not offering to solve your problems. I'm offering to help you access resources that already exist, but that can be difficult to navigate alone." The distinction felt important, preserving Marcus's dignity while acknowledging the reality of his situation. Sarah's approach suggested partnership rather than rescue, collaboration rather than dependency. "Why now?" Marcus asked again, still struggling to understand the timing of her intervention. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried vulnerability that she'd been carefully controlling throughout their conversation. "Because I've spent 13 years building a career around helping families, and the whole time I've been thinking about the family I might have had with you," she said, "because I never stopped wondering what might have happened if life hadn't interrupted us, and because I finally admitted to myself that I've been waiting for an excuse to reach out to you since the day you disappeared from my life." The honesty of her admission hit Marcus like a physical force. Sarah's professional success and apparent stability had masked an emotional reality that mirrored his own experience of wondering about roads not taken and connections that had been severed by circumstance rather than choice. "I thought about you too," Marcus said quietly, "more than I probably should have, given that I was married and trying to build a different life." "I know," Sarah said. "I could tell from the way you talked about Emma's mother that you cared about her, but I could also tell that it wasn't the same kind of connection we had." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, processing the weight of mutual admission and the implications of Sarah's reappearance in his life. Marcus felt something shifting in his chest, a sense of possibility that he'd been afraid to acknowledge for fear of disappointment. Emma emerged from her room as if summoned by some internal timer that told her the adult conversation had reached an appropriate conclusion. She approached the couch with her favorite book clutched in her hands, clearly hoping to extend Sarah's visit through the ancient childhood strategy of requesting a story. "Would you like to read with me?" Emma asked Sarah, holding up the worn paperback with hopeful eyes. Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded his permission, then accepted the book with the reverence appropriate to such an honor. As she read to Emma, her voice taking on the animated qualities that good storytellers use to bring characters to life, Marcus watched his daughter's face light up with delight. The scene felt both foreign and familiar, like a memory from a future he'd never allowed himself to imagine. Sarah's presence in his apartment, reading to his daughter, created a sense of completeness that he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The domestic tableau suggested possibilities that extended far beyond their current conversation about practical assistance and professional resources. Dinner was a simple affair. Leftovers from Sarah's generous delivery supplemented by whatever Marcus could find in his pantry. But the meal felt abundant in ways that had nothing to do with the quantity of food. Emma chattered throughout dinner, asking Sarah questions about her work and sharing details about her school and friends with the openness of someone who had decided that their guest was trustworthy. Sarah listened to Emma's stories with the focused attention of someone who understood that children's seemingly random observations often contained important truths about their inner lives. She asked follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest and offered responses that validated Emma's experiences without talking down to her. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in months. The constant low-level anxiety that accompanied single parenthood seemed to ease in Sarah's presence, as if her professional competence and obvious care for Emma created a safety net that allowed him to breathe more deeply. When it came time for Sarah to leave, Emma hugged her with the spontaneous affection of someone who had found a new favorite person. Sarah's eyes glistened as she returned the embrace, and Marcus could see that his daughter had affected her as powerfully as she had affected Emma. "Will you come back?" Emma asked with the directness that made negotiations with 8-year-olds both refreshing and challenging. "If your dad says it's okay, I'd love to come back," Sarah replied, looking at Marcus with a question in her eyes. "You're always welcome here," Marcus said, meaning it completely. After Emma went to bed, Marcus and Sarah stood in his kitchen, the site of that morning's mysterious delivery, and talked about next steps. Sarah outlined several concrete ways she could help, from providing information about housing assistance programs to introducing Marcus to employers who might offer more stable work arrangements. "I don't want to rush anything," Sarah said. "I know this is all very sudden, and I want you to have time to think about what kind of help you're comfortable accepting." Marcus nodded, appreciating her sensitivity to his need to maintain some measure of control over the process. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Are you hoping this leads somewhere beyond just helping out an old friend?" Sarah's smile was soft and slightly sad. "I'm hoping it leads wherever it's supposed to lead," she said. "I care about you, Marcus. I always have. But I also know that you have to focus on Emma and on building stability for your family. Whatever happens between us personally will have to develop naturally, without pressure or expectations." The maturity of her response impressed Marcus and eased some of his concerns about potentially complicated emotional dynamics. Sarah's approach suggested someone who had thought carefully about the implications of reconnecting and who was prepared to let their relationship evolve at whatever pace felt appropriate. "Thank you," Marcus said, "for the food, for coming here today, for being patient with my wariness. This has been the best day Emma and I have had in a long time." Sarah reached out and briefly touched his hand, a gesture that conveyed affection, without demanding reciprocation. "Thank you for letting me back into your life," she said. "I know it's a leap of faith." After Sarah left, Marcus stood in his apartment and marveled at how different the space felt. The same toys scattered across the floor, the same bills waiting on the counter, the same challenges that would greet him tomorrow morning. But underneath the familiar struggles was something new: hope, connection, and the radical possibility that he and Emma weren't as alone in the world as he'd believed. Marcus checked on Emma, who was already asleep but smiling in her dreams. He cleaned the kitchen with unusual care, as if the simple act of washing dishes that had held a meal shared with Sarah deserved special attention. When he finally returned to his laptop, the freelance projects that had seemed overwhelming the night before appeared manageable, even promising. The wrong delivery had become the right beginning, opening a door that Marcus hadn't realized he'd been waiting for someone to knock on. Sarah Chen had returned to his life not as a rescuer or a solution to his problems, but as a reminder that some connections transcend time and distance, and that sometimes the universe operates with a kindness that defies rational explanation. Whatever came next, Marcus faced it with the confidence of someone who had been reminded that he was capable of inspiring love and care in others. The letter from Sarah still lay on his counter, but its mysteries had been replaced by possibilities, and its questions had become invitations to imagine a future that included partnership, support, and the radical notion that struggle didn't have to be a solitary endeavor. The night settled around apartment 4B with the comfortable weight of possibility realized and hope restored. Marcus Thompson closed his laptop and prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to build on the foundation that Sarah's unexpected delivery had created. The wrong order had delivered exactly what he needed: connection, support, and the transformative reminder that some waiting is rewarded with exactly the right person arriving at exactly the right moment. The application packet arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier service that Marcus had never seen in his neighborhood before. The manila envelope bore the letterhead of Riverside Family Housing Initiative, an organization he'd never heard of despite living in the area for 3 years. Inside, he found paperwork that would normally take months to obtain, pre-filled with information about his employment history, Emma's school records, and financial documentation that he hadn't provided to anyone recently. Marcus spread the documents across his kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he tried to understand how Sarah had orchestrated this level of coordination in less than a week since their reunion. The housing application wasn't just comprehensive, it was strategically crafted, highlighting his stability as a parent and his freelance income in ways that made his financial situation appear sustainable rather than precarious. Someone with intimate knowledge of housing assistance programs had clearly spent considerable time preparing these materials. Emma bounced into the kitchen, wearing mismatched socks and a t-shirt that proclaimed her allegiance to a cartoon character Marcus didn't recognize. She paused beside his chair, studying the official-looking papers with the curiosity of someone who had learned to pay attention when adult business involved their household. "Are we moving?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the careful neutrality that children develop when they've experienced enough instability to know that change doesn't always mean improvement. Marcus looked at his daughter, noting the way she held her shoulders slightly rigid despite her casual tone. Emma had never known the security of a permanent home, having moved 4 times in her 8 years as he'd chased cheaper rent and better opportunities. The prospect of another relocation would naturally cause anxiety, even if this change promised improvement. "Maybe," Marcus said, choosing honesty over false reassurance. "Sarah knows about some programs that might help us find a better place to live, but nothing's decided yet, and if we do move, it would be to somewhere better, more stable." Emma nodded with the seriousness of someone processing information that would affect her daily life in fundamental ways. She'd attended 3 different elementary schools, made and lost friends with each relocation, and learned to pack her most precious possessions in a single backpack in case circumstances required sudden departure. "Would we have our own yard?" Emma asked, revealing dreams she'd been harboring about domestic stability that included outdoor space and the kind of permanence that allowed for planting flowers. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted, "but Sarah is trying to help us find options that would give us more space and better security." After Emma left for school, Marcus called the number listed on the housing application materials. The woman who answered spoke with the professional warmth of someone who spent her days helping families navigate bureaucratic systems designed to provide assistance while simultaneously creating obstacles to receiving it. "Mr. Thompson," the housing coordinator said when Marcus identified himself. "Ms. Chen told us to expect your call. She's provided an excellent preliminary assessment of your family's needs and qualifications. When would be convenient for you to schedule a property viewing?" Marcus felt disoriented by the efficiency of the process. Housing assistance programs typically involved months of paperwork, waiting lists, and bureaucratic delays. The fact that he was being offered immediate property viewings suggested that Sarah possessed influence and connections that extended far beyond what she'd revealed during their dinner conversation. "How many properties are available?" Marcus asked, still trying to understand the scope of what was being offered. "Ms. Chen has identified 3 units that would meet your family's needs," the coordinator replied. "All are 2-bedroom apartments in good school districts with reduced rent based on income qualification. The properties are managed by our partner organizations and have waiting lists, but Ms. Chen has requested priority placement based on your circumstances." Marcus scheduled viewings for the following afternoon, then spent the rest of the morning researching Riverside Family Housing Initiative online. What he discovered made him understand that Sarah's involvement in his life represented far more than personal reconnection. The organization was a major regional nonprofit with an annual budget that exceeded the GDP of small countries, and Sarah Chen was listed as a board member with significant influence over funding decisions. The realization that Sarah possessed this level of professional power and had chosen to use it on his behalf created a complex mixture of gratitude and unease. Her assistance wasn't just the help of an old friend with some useful connections. It was the intervention of someone with the ability to reshape his family's circumstances through institutional influence that most people never accessed. Marcus called Sarah that afternoon, reaching her at her office where she answered with the brisk professionalism of someone managing multiple crises simultaneously. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice warming immediately upon recognizing his voice. "How are you processing everything? I know the housing materials probably feel overwhelming." "I'm trying to understand how you made this happen so quickly," Marcus said. "The housing coordinator is talking about priority placement and immediate viewings. That's not how these programs usually work." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could hear the background noise of a busy office environment, phones ringing and muffled conversations suggesting the controlled chaos of social services work. "I may have used my position to expedite your application," Sarah admitted. "The programs exist to help families exactly like yours, but the bureaucracy can delay assistance for months or years. I know the people who run these organizations, and I asked them to prioritize your case based on Emma's stability needs and your work history." Marcus felt his pride bristle at the implication that he'd been moved ahead of other families who might be equally deserving of assistance. "What about other people who have been waiting longer?" "The units I've identified were specifically set aside for emergency placements," Sarah explained. "They weren't taking spots away from other families. And Marcus, I want to be clear about something. I didn't do this because I felt sorry for you. I did it because you and Emma deserve stability, and because I have the ability to help make that happen." The distinction felt important, preserving Marcus's dignity while acknowledging the reality of his situation. Sarah's intervention wasn't charity, but rather strategic application of institutional resources that she had legitimate authority to deploy. "Can I see the properties tomorrow?" Marcus asked. "I'll pick you up at 2C, Sarah replied. "I want to see them too, to make sure they meet standards that I consider appropriate for Emma's development and your work needs." The following afternoon, Sarah arrived at Marcus's apartment driving a silver sedan that suggested professional success without ostentation. She wore business attire that emphasized her competence while remaining approachable, And when Emma ran to greet her with the enthusiasm of someone who had found a new favorite adult, Sarah's face lit up with genuine delight. "Are you coming to see our new house?" Emma asked, demonstrating the optimism that children maintain even when their experience suggests caution about dramatic changes. "I'm coming to help your dad look at some possibilities," Sarah corrected gently. "Nothing's decided yet, but we want to see what options might work for your family." The first property was located in a complex that looked designed by committee, with beige siding and minimal landscaping that suggested functionality over aesthetics. The apartment itself was clean and spacious, with 2 bedrooms that would give Emma her own space and Marcus a dedicated office area. But the neighborhood felt transient, with high turnover and few amenities that would encourage community formation. Emma explored the empty rooms with the thoroughness of someone conducting an important inspection, testing light switches and examining closet space with the seriousness of a potential buyer. Her questions revealed priorities that impressed both: adults, proximity to good schools, safety for walking alone, and whether pets were allowed in case they ever decided to adopt a dog. "It's nice," Emma declared diplomatically, demonstrating tact that suggested emotional intelligence beyond her ears. "But it doesn't feel like home yet." The second property was located in an older neighborhood where tree-lined streets and front porches suggested community stability. The apartment occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house with high ceilings and original woodwork that gave the space character. Emma immediately gravitated toward the large windows in what would be her bedroom, noting that she could see a playground across the street. "This feels different," Emma announced, her voice carrying excitement that she'd been carefully containing. During the first viewing, "It feels like people stay here." Marcus walked through the rooms with Sarah, noting details that suggested quality construction and maintenance. The kitchen was updated but retained period charm, and the bedrooms were large enough for Emma to have space for play as well as sleep. Most importantly, the rent was significantly reduced through the Housing Assistance Program, bringing their monthly expenses down to manageable levels. "What do you think?" Sarah asked as they stood in the living room while Emma examined the built-in bookshelves with obvious approval. "I think it's almost too good to be true," Marcus admitted, "which makes me nervous about what the catch might be." Sarah smiled with understanding of his wariness. "The catch is that you have to maintain stable income and allow periodic check-ins from the housing program coordinator. But Marcus, this isn't a trap or a temporary solution. This program is designed to provide long-term stability for families who need a foundation to build from." The third property was in a modern complex with amenities that included a community center and playground. The apartment was larger than the Victorian conversion, but lacked character, feeling more like temporary housing than a potential home. Emma's response was polite but unenthusiastic, and Marcus found himself agreeing with her assessment. After the viewings, they stopped for ice cream at a shop near the Victorian house, partly to give Emma a treat and partly to allow Marcus and Sarah to discuss the options while Emma was distracted by choosing between 17 flavors of frozen possibility. "She loves the house with the big windows," Sarah observed, watching Emma debate the relative merits of cookies and cream versus chocolate chip cookie dough. "She does," Marcus agreed, "and honestly so do I. But I'm having trouble believing that this level of assistance comes without strings attached." Sarah looked at him directly, her expression serious, despite the cheerful chaos of the ice cream shop around them. "Marcus, I need you to understand something about how these programs work. They exist because communities function better when families have stable housing. The assistance isn't charity, it's investment in social stability that benefits everyone." Emma returned to their table with a cone that threatened to topple from its own architectural ambition, requiring immediate attention to prevent disaster. As she worked to manage the engineering challenge of eating ice cream faster than it could melt, Marcus found himself watching Sarah's interactions with his daughter. Sarah treated Emma like a person whose opinions mattered, asking thoughtful questions about her preferences and listening to her responses with the focused attention that children rarely received from adults. When Emma expressed concern about leaving her current school and friends, Sarah acknowledged the difficulty of such transitions while helping her think through strategies for staying connected with current friends while making new ones. "Change is hard," Sarah told Emma, "but sometimes it opens up possibilities that we couldn't see before. And the most important thing, your relationship with your dad, that stays exactly the same no matter where you live." Emma nodded with the seriousness of someone processing important information. "Would you still visit us if we moved to the house with big windows?" "If your dad says it's okay, I'd love to visit you wherever you live," Sarah replied, glancing at Marcus for confirmation. "You're always welcome," Marcus said, meaning it completely. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus sat in his kitchen with the housing application materials spread before him. The Victorian apartment represented possibilities that he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine: stability, community, space for Emma to grow and thrive. But accepting the assistance meant acknowledging that he couldn't provide these things for his family through his own efforts alone. His phone rang, interrupting his internal debate. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and he answered with the conflicted feelings that had been building throughout the day. "I wanted to check in," Sarah said. "I know today was a lot to process." "It was," Marcus agreed. "Sarah, I need to ask you something directly. What do you want from me in return for all this help?" The question hung between them, carrying weight that extended beyond housing assistance to encompass the entire nature of their reconnection. Marcus needed to understand whether Sarah's generosity came with emotional expectations that might complicate their renewed relationship. "I want you and Emma to have the stability you deserve," Sarah said simply. "And I want the chance to be part of your lives, if you'll let me. But those are two separate things, Marcus. The housing assistance doesn't depend on your personal feelings about me." "Ah, but you're hoping it leads to something more between us," Marcus pressed, needing clarity about her motivations. Sarah sighed, and when she spoke, her voice carried vulnerability that she'd been carefully controlling. "I'm hoping it leads wherever it's supposed to lead. I care about you and I care about Emma. I've spent 13 years wondering what might have been, and now I have the chance to find out. But I'm not trying to buy my way into your life or create obligations that you don't freely choose." The honesty of her response eased some of Marcus's concerns while raising new questions about his own feelings and intentions. Sarah's reappearance had disrupted his careful emotional equilibrium, introducing possibilities that both excited and terrified him. "What if it doesn't work out between us?" Marcus asked. "What if we try to reconnect romantically and it fails? Emma's already attached to you." "Then we figure out how to maintain a friendship that honors our connection while protecting Emma's emotional well-being," Sarah replied. "Marcus, I'm not a college student anymore. I understand that relationships are complicated and that children's needs have to come first. Whatever happens between us personally, Emma will always have my care and support." The maturity of Sarah's perspective impressed Marcus and helped him understand that she'd thought carefully about the complexities of reuniting with someone who had parental responsibilities. Her approach suggested someone prepared for various outcomes rather than someone operating from unrealistic romantic fantasies. "I want to accept the housing assistance," Marcus said. "The Victorian apartment. Emma loves it, and it would give us the stability we need." "I'm glad," Sarah said, and he could hear genuine happiness in her voice. "I think it's the right choice for both of you. And I want to explore whatever this is between us," Marcus continued, "but slowly, carefully, with Emma's well-being as the primary consideration." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say," Sarah replied. The housing transition happened with efficiency that continued to amaze Marcus. Within 2 weeks, he and Emma were moving their modest possessions into the Victorian apartment, assisted by a team of volunteers that Sarah had somehow assembled. The moving day felt more like a community celebration than a relocation, with neighbors from their new building stopping by to introduce themselves and offer welcome gifts. Emma explored her new room with the excitement of someone who had finally found a space that felt permanent. The large windows that had captured her attention during the viewing looked out onto a tree that she immediately claimed as her own, announcing plans to watch it change through the seasons. Her enthusiasm was infectious, helping Marcus feel optimistic about their new beginning. Sarah arrived that evening with takeout dinner and a small housewarming gift for Emma, a journal with a beautiful cover and blank pages for recording her observations about their new neighborhood. Emma accepted the gift with the solemn appreciation of someone who understood that blank books represented infinite possibilities. "Now you can write down all the things you discover about living here," Sarah explained. "The interesting people you meet, the new places you explore, the ways your tree changes as the seasons progress." Emma hugged the journal to her chest with the fierce affection that children reserve for objects that represent hope and possibility. "Will you help me write in it sometimes?" "If your dad says it's okay, I'd love to help you document your adventures," Sarah replied. As they ate dinner in their new dining room, Marcus felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. The apartment felt like home in ways that transcended physical comfort, suggesting the kind of stability that allowed families to think beyond immediate survival toward longer-term dreams and aspirations. After Emma went to bed, Marcus and Sarah sat on the front porch of the Victorian house, watching their new neighborhood settle into evening routines. Families walked dogs, children played elaborate games that seemed to involve complex rules about sidewalk boundaries, and elderly residents tended to gardens that suggested decades of careful cultivation. "Thank you," Marcus said, the words carrying weight that encompassed housing assistance, renewed connection, and hope for possibilities he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. "Thank you for letting me help," Sarah replied, "and for giving me the chance to be part of Emma's life. She's an extraordinary kid, Marcus." "She is," Marcus agreed, "and she's already crazy about you." They sat in comfortable silence, processing the changes that had transformed their lives in the space of a few weeks. Marcus felt grateful and overwhelmed simultaneously, still adjusting to the reality that he and Emma were no longer struggling alone against circumstances that had seemed insurmountable. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we figure out what our lives look like with stability as a foundation instead of uncertainty," Sarah said. "Emma gets to attend a school where she can build long-term friendships. You get to focus on developing your career instead of just surviving. And we get to discover what kind of relationship we want to build together." The possibilities felt both exciting and daunting. Marcus had become so accustomed to crisis management that he wasn't sure how to function when basic needs were reliably met. The prospect of thinking beyond immediate necessities toward actual goals and dreams required a fundamental shift in perspective. Over the following weeks, they established new routines that incorporated Sarah's presence in natural ways. She joined them for dinner twice a week, helped Emma with homework that required adult assistance, and accompanied them to community events that helped them integrate into their new neighborhood. Her involvement felt organic rather than forced, adding richness to their daily lives without disrupting the parent-child dynamic that remained Marcus's primary responsibility. Emma thrived in their new environment, making friends with neighborhood children and developing confidence that came from knowing she wouldn't have to leave just as relationships were beginning to form. Her teacher noted improvements in her academic performance and social engagement, changes that Marcus attributed to the security of knowing their housing situation was stable. Marcus found that reduced financial pressure allowed him to be more selective about freelance projects, choosing work that matched his skills and interests rather than accepting any assignment that provided immediate income. His portfolio improved as he could afford to invest time in developing proposals for clients who valued quality over speed. The relationship between Marcus and Sarah deepened gradually, built on shared experiences with Emma and quiet conversations after she went to bed. They discovered that their connection had matured along with them, becoming something more substantial than the intense but brief romance they'd shared as graduate students. One evening in late autumn, as they sat on the porch watching Emma rake leaves with the assistance of neighborhood children who had turned yard work into an elaborate game, Sarah reached over and took Marcus's hand. "I have something I need to tell you," she said, her voice carrying seriousness that made Marcus's attention sharpen. "What is it?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching Emma's animated supervision of the leaf-raking operation. "I've been offered a job opportunity that would require relocating. It's a significant promotion, the kind of career advancement that only comes along once or twice in a lifetime." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Just as their lives had achieved stability, circumstances were threatening to disrupt the foundation they'd been building together. "Where?" Marcus asked. "Seattle," Sarah replied, "regional director for a coalition of family service organizations. It's the kind of position I've been working toward my entire career." Marcus processed this information, trying to understand its implications for their new relationship and Emma's attachment to Sarah. The selfish part of him wanted to ask her to decline the opportunity, but he understood that Sarah had her own professional aspirations that deserved consideration. "When would you need to decide?" Marcus asked. "They want an answer by the end of the month," Sarah said. "But Marcus, I want you to know that this decision isn't just about my career anymore. What we're building here, what I have with you and Emma, that matters to me too." "But this is your dream job," Marcus said, recognizing the conflict she was facing. "Maybe," Sarah agreed, "but I've learned that career success doesn't mean much if you don't have people to share it with. And I've waited 13 years to have another chance with you. I'm not eager to give that up for a job title." They sat in silence, watching Emma's leaf-raking operation evolve into what appeared to be a neighborhood festival involving children from 3 different households. Her laughter carried across the yard, a sound that represented everything Marcus wanted to protect and nurture. "What if we came with you?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the spontaneity of the offer. Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You'd consider relocating?" "Emma and I have moved 4 times in her life," Marcus said. "But those moves were about running from problems. This would be about running toward opportunities. Seattle has a strong market for freelance design work, and Emma's young enough that starting over wouldn't be traumatic if she knew it was leading to something better." "You'd do that?" Sarah asked. "I'd consider it," Marcus clarified. "If we could figure out how to make it work financially and practically, and if Emma was excited about the adventure." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma bounded onto the porch with her clothes covered in leaf fragments and her cheeks flushed with excitement from her yard work coordination activities. "Dad, Sarah," she announced breathlessly, "the kids want to know if we can have a leaf pile jumping contest before their parents make them clean up." Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing possibility reflected in her eyes. "What do you think, Emma? Want to show these neighborhood kids how leaf pile jumping is really done?" Emma grinned and grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the yard where childhood and adulthood could meet in the simple joy of playing in autumn leaves. As they joined the impromptu neighborhood gathering, Marcus felt grateful for the strange mathematics of coincidence that had brought Sarah back into their lives at exactly the moment when they were ready to embrace new possibilities. The wrong delivery had become the foundation for choices that would reshape their future in ways none of them could have predicted. Whether they stayed in their Victorian apartment or relocated to Seattle, they would face that future together, as a family that had been created not by biology, but by care, commitment, and the radical decision to believe that some connections are worth building a life around. The autumn evening settled around them, with the promise of seasons ahead, each one offering opportunities to discover what their unusual family could become when stability provided the foundation for dreams rather than mere survival. Marcus Thompson looked at Emma's joyful face and Sarah's warm smile and realized that sometimes the wrong thing delivered at exactly the right moment becomes the catalyst for everything you never knew you needed. The conference room at Seattle Family Services felt like a cathedral of ambition, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city's skyline and modern furniture that suggested an organization comfortable with its own success. Sarah sat at the polished mahogany table, her hands folded professionally, while her mind raced through calculations that had nothing to do with the salary package spread before her. Director Patricia Mills, a woman whose silver hair and confident demeanor spoke of decades spent navigating non-profit politics, leaned forward with the intensity of someone accustomed to closing important deals. The offer on the table represented everything Sarah had worked toward professionally: a position overseeing family services for 3 states, a budget that could impact thousands of lives, and recognition as one of the youngest regional directors in the organization's history. "We need an answer within the week," Director Mills said, her voice carrying the gentle pressure of someone who expected positive responses to exceptional opportunities. "The board is eager to move forward with restructuring, and your reputation precedes you, Ms. Chen. The work you've done in Ohio has been remarkable." Sarah nodded, maintaining the composed professionalism that had carried her through years of high-stakes negotiations, while internally wrestling with decisions that felt impossible to reconcile. 3 months earlier, this opportunity would have been an unqualified triumph. Now it felt like choosing between professional fulfillment and personal happiness, with Emma's well-being caught in the balance. "I understand the timeline," Sarah replied. "This is obviously a significant decision that requires careful consideration." Director Mills smiled with the confidence of someone who had spent years convincing talented professionals to relocate for career advancement. Seattle offers exceptional quality of life, particularly for families. The school systems are outstanding, the cultural opportunities abundant, and the professional network here could benefit someone with your expertise significantly. After the meeting, Sarah walked through Seattle's downtown core, observing the city that could become her new home, with the analytical eye of someone evaluating more than real estate markets and commute patterns. The Pacific Northwest's natural beauty was undeniable, and the progressive culture would align with her values in ways that smaller Midwest cities sometimes struggled to accommodate. But every coffee shop, park, and bookstore she passed prompted thoughts of how Emma would respond to such dramatic change. The flight back to Ohio provided 3 hours of uninterrupted thinking time, that Sarah used to construct mental lists of pros and cons that somehow failed to capture the emotional complexity of her situation. Professionally, accepting the Seattle position represented logical progression in a career built on helping families achieve stability. Personally, it meant potentially disrupting the family stability she had just helped Marcus and Emma achieve. Marcus met her at the airport with Emma bouncing excitedly in the passenger seat, their faces lit with anticipation that made Sarah's internal conflict feel even more acute. Emma had spent the 3 days of Sarah's absence creating elaborate welcome home decorations that now festooned the car's interior, transforming Marcus's modest sedan into a celebration of return. "How did it go?" Marcus asked, as they drove through familiar neighborhoods that now felt more like home than the city she had just left. "It went well," Sarah replied carefully, aware that Emma was listening with the focused attention that children bring to conversations involving adult decisions that might affect their lives. "Seattle is beautiful, and the position would be an incredible opportunity." Emma turned in her seat to face Sarah with the directness that had become characteristic of their relationship. "But you're coming back, right? You're not moving away forever." The question pierced through Sarah's professional composure, revealing the child's fundamental concern about abandonment that no amount of career advancement could address. Emma had experienced enough instability to understand that adult decisions often resulted in important people disappearing from children's lives. "Nothing's decided yet," Sarah said gently, "but whatever happens, you and your dad will always be important to me." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus and Sarah sat in their Victorian apartment's living room, surrounded by the domestic evidence of the life they had been building together. Emma's artwork covered the walls. Marcus's design projects occupied a corner desk that Sarah had helped him select, and photographs from recent family outings created a visual narrative of increasing connection and commitment. "Tell me about the job," Marcus said, settling beside Sarah on the couch with 2 cups of tea that had become part of their evening ritual. Sarah described the scope of the position, the resources she would oversee, and the potential impact on family services across the Pacific Northwest. As she spoke, she watched Marcus's face for signs of resentment or frustration, but found only thoughtful attention and what appeared to be genuine pride in her professional accomplishments. "It sounds like exactly what you've been working toward," Marcus observed when she finished. "It is," Sarah agreed, "but I've been working toward other things too." Marcus set down his teacup and turned to face her directly. "Sarah, I need you to know that I won't ask you to sacrifice your career for us. What we have is important, but you spent years building your professional reputation before we reconnected. I can't be responsible for derailing that trajectory." "What if I don't want to choose between career advancement and personal happiness?" Sarah asked. "What if there's a way to have both?" "You mean relocating together?" Marcus asked. "I mean making decisions as a family," Sarah replied. "The 3 of us, because that's what we've become, isn't it? A family." The word hung between them, carrying weight that extended beyond their romantic relationship to encompass Emma's emotional investment and the daily routines they had developed together. Family implied commitment that transcended individual desires, responsibility for collective well-being, and decision-making processes that prioritized group stability over personal ambition. Emma would have to change schools again, Marcus said, voicing concerns that had been troubling him since Sarah's return. "She's finally settled here, made friends, found stability. Asking her to start over in a new city feels unfair." "It would be a big change," Sarah acknowledged, "but it would also be an adventure, and Emma has shown remarkable resilience when changes lead to improvements in her life. The question is whether relocating to Seattle would improve her life or simply disrupt the stability she's finally achieved. They spent the next hour discussing practical considerations. Marcus's ability to find work in Seattle's competitive design market, the cost of living differences between Ohio and Washington, the logistics of relocating with minimal financial resources. Each topic revealed new complexities that made the decision feel increasingly overwhelming. "There's something else we need to discuss," Sarah said as their conversation deepened. "If we relocate to Seattle, we'd be moving forward as a committed family unit. That's a bigger step than we've taken so far." Marcus understood the implications of her statement. Their relationship had been developing gradually, allowing emotional intimacy to build alongside practical partnership. Relocating together would represent a public commitment that would be difficult to reverse if their relationship encountered problems. "Are you ready for that level of commitment?" Marcus asked. "I think I've been ready since the night I sent you Chinese food," Sarah replied. "The question is whether you are." Marcus considered her question, examining his feelings with the honesty that their situation demanded. His love for Sarah had grown from the renewed connection they had established, but it was complicated by gratitude for her assistance and concern about power imbalances in their relationship. Her financial stability and professional success created dynamics that required careful navigation to preserve his sense of autonomy and dignity. "I love you," Marcus said finally, "but I'm also scared of becoming dependent on your success in ways that might undermine my ability to contribute equally to our partnership." Sarah reached for his hand, her touch conveying understanding and reassurance. "Marcus, I fell in love with your character, not your financial circumstances. Your worth as a partner has nothing to do with your income level. And frankly, Emma needs a father more than she needs a provider. You're already giving her the most important thing any parent can offer: unconditional love and consistent presence." But if we moved to Seattle, I'd be starting over professionally while you'd be advancing in your career," Marcus pointed out. "That creates an imbalance that could cause problems down the road." "All relationships involve imbalances that shift over time," Sarah replied. "Right now, I have more financial resources. In the future, your career might surpass mine. The key is maintaining respect and appreciation for each other's contributions, regardless of how they're measured externally." Their conversation was interrupted by soft footsteps in the hallway, followed by Emma's appearance in the living room doorway. Her hair stuck up at impossible angles, and she clutched her favorite stuffed animal with the desperate grip of someone who'd been awakened by anxiety rather than physical discomfort. "I had a dream that Sarah moved away and we never saw her again," Emma announced, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone that children use to discuss their deepest fears. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances that acknowledged the psychological pressure their adult decision-making was placing on Emma's emotional well-being. Children possessed radar for detecting when important adults were considering changes that might affect their security, and Emma's nightmare reflected her instinctive understanding that their family configuration was under review. "Come here, sweetheart," Sarah said, patting the couch cushion beside her. "Let's talk about what's really happening." Emma approached cautiously, climbing onto the couch between Marcus and Sarah with the careful movements of someone seeking comfort while remaining prepared for disappointment. Sarah wrapped an arm around Emma's shoulders, and Marcus took her hand, creating a physical connection that reinforced their emotional bonds. "Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about work and where to live," Sarah explained. "I've been offered a job in Seattle that would be good for my career, but it would mean moving away from here." But you don't want to leave us," Emma said, phrasing it as a statement rather than a question. "I absolutely don't want to leave you," Sarah confirmed, "which is why I'm wondering if you and your dad might want to move to Seattle with me." Emma's eyes widened as she processed this possibility. "Like all of us together? All of us together, Sarah confirmed. As a family. Emma looked between Marcus and Sarah with the seriousness of someone conducting an important negotiation. Would I have to change schools again? Yes, Marcus said honestly. But we'd make sure you started at a really good school where you could make new friends while staying in touch with your friends here. Would we live in a house or an apartment? Emma asked, revealing priorities that suggested she had been thinking about domestic stability more than her parents had realized. We'd find a place that feels like home, Sarah said. Maybe a house with a yard where you could have a pet if you wanted one. Emma's face lit up at the mention of pets, a possibility that their current rental situation had precluded. Could we get a dog? We could definitely get a dog, Sarah confirmed, earning a look of gratitude from Marcus, who had been feeling guilty about denying Emma's repeated requests for animal companionship. What about my tree? Emma asked, referring to the large oak outside her bedroom window that she had claimed as her personal weather monitoring station. I've been watching it change, and I want to see what it looks like in winter. Seattle has lots of beautiful trees, Sarah said. And you could find a new tree to watch while keeping a picture of your Ohio tree in your journal. Emma considered this information with the gravity of someone weighing important factors in a complex decision. Can I think about it? Of course, Marcus said. This is a big decision that affects all of us, and we want to make sure everyone feels good about whatever we choose. After Emma returned to bed, Marcus and Sarah continued their discussion with increased urgency. Emma's involvement had clarified the stakes involved in their decision and emphasized the need to reach resolution quickly. Prolonged uncertainty would create anxiety for all of them, particularly Emma, who needed security more than she needed perfect circumstances. She's warming up to the idea, Sarah observed. The prospect of a dog helped, Marcus replied. But she's also resilient enough to adapt to change when it comes with clear benefits. The question is whether we can make Seattle work practically. They spent the next 2 hours researching Seattle's economy, school districts, and housing markets online. What they discovered was both encouraging and daunting. The city offered excellent opportunities for Marcus's freelance design work, but the cost of living was significantly higher than their current location. Sarah's salary would be substantial enough to support their family comfortably, but Marcus would need time to establish his client base in a competitive market. I have savings, Sarah said when they discussed financial logistics. Enough to support us for several months while you build your client base. And I know people in Seattle who could provide networking opportunities for your business. Marcus felt his pride bristle at the suggestion of financial dependence, even temporarily. I don't want to be a kept man while you're establishing your career. You wouldn't be a kept man, Sarah replied firmly. You'd be my partner, contributing to our family in ways that go beyond immediate income generation. Emma needs a parent who can be present for school events and daily routines. My job will require extensive travel and long hours. Your flexibility would be an asset to our family functioning. The reframing helped Marcus see their potential arrangement as complementary rather than imbalanced. Sarah's career demands would require domestic support that his freelance schedule could provide, creating a partnership where both contributions were valuable even if one was more immediately lucrative. What if my business doesn't succeed in Seattle? Marcus asked. Then we'll figure out alternatives, Sarah said. Marcus, I've spent my career helping families navigate uncertainty. I know how to develop contingency plans and access resources. When original strategies don't work out, we'd face whatever challenges arise together. The following morning brought a phone call that crystallized their decision-making process. Marcus's largest client, a company that had provided steady work for 18 months, announced they were restructuring and would no longer require his services. The loss of income was significant enough to threaten their ability to maintain their current lifestyle, even with the reduced rent from Sarah's housing assistance program. "Maybe this is the universe telling us something," Marcus said as he explained the situation to Sarah. "My client base here is precarious anyway. Starting over in Seattle might not be riskier than staying here and hoping for new opportunities." Emma's reaction to the news was characteristically practical. "Does this mean we should definitely move to Seattle?" "It means we should seriously consider it," Marcus replied. "But the decision is still yours to make too, Emma. If you really don't want to leave, we'll figure out other solutions." Emma was quiet for several minutes, her 8-year-old mind working through considerations that most adults would find challenging. Finally, she spoke with the clarity that children sometimes bring to complex situations. "I think we should move," she announced, "because Sarah makes us happy, and we make her happy, and being happy together is more important than staying in the same place." The wisdom of her statement struck both adults with the force of simple truth. Emma had distilled their complex deliberations into a fundamental recognition that relationships mattered more than locations, that family connections could provide stability even when external circumstances changed. Sarah's acceptance of the Seattle position felt inevitable once Emma had articulated her support for the move. The subsequent weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus wound down his Ohio client relationships while beginning to network in Seattle. Emma processed her emotions about leaving friends while expressing excitement about new adventures, and Sarah coordinated the logistics of relocating a family across the country. The hardest conversation came when they had to explain their plans to Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had provided maternal support to Emma during their most difficult period. Her reaction was bittersweet, joy for their family's growth, tempered by sadness about losing their daily presence in her life. "You're doing the right thing," Mrs. Patterson told Marcus as they stood in the hallway outside their apartments. "That little girl deserves a family, and Sarah Chen is good people. Don't let pride keep you from embracing happiness when it finds you." Emma's goodbye to her neighborhood friends was tearful but hopeful, with promises to stay in touch through video calls and letters. Her teacher provided a portfolio of her academic work to help with the transition to a new school, along with a recommendation letter that emphasized her resilience and adaptability. The process of leaving their Victorian apartment felt like dismantling a dream that had just begun to feel real. But as they packed their belongings, Sarah helped Emma and Marcus see the move as expansion rather than loss. They weren't abandoning the stability they had found. They were carrying it with them to a place where it could grow into something even better. Marcus's final freelance project in Ohio came from an unexpected source, designing marketing materials for Sarah's farewell celebration. The irony wasn't lost on him that his last professional work in their current city would be creating materials to celebrate their departure. But the project felt symbolic of their partnership, combining his creative skills with her professional network in ways that benefited both their careers. The farewell party itself was a revelation of how deeply Sarah had impacted her professional community. Colleagues, clients, and community partners filled the venue with testimonials about her work and expressions of regret about her departure. But throughout the evening, Sarah's attention remained focused on Marcus and Emma, making it clear that her professional success was secondary to her personal priorities. Emma charmed the attendees with her confident responses to questions about their upcoming move, demonstrating the communication skills she had developed through months of interacting with Sarah's professional colleagues. Her poise impressed Marcus and reinforced his confidence that she would adapt successfully to new social environments. "She's going to thrive in Seattle," predicted Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist who had worked with Sarah on Family. intervention programs. Children with strong attachment relationships can handle geographic transitions remarkably well. Emma clearly feels secure in her family connections. The drive to Seattle took 3 days, with overnight stops that became mini adventures as they explored small towns and national parks along their route. Emma documented each stop in her journal, creating a record of their journey that she could reference when homesickness struck. Sarah had planned the route to include child-friendly attractions that would make the long drive feel like a vacation, rather than displacement. Marcus found himself appreciating Sarah's organizational skills in new ways as their trip unfolded smoothly despite complex logistics. She had reserved hotel rooms, researched restaurants that would appeal to Emma's preferences, and planned activities that would help them bond as a traveling family. Her attention to detail reflected care for their collective well-being that went beyond romantic affection to encompass genuine commitment to family functioning. Their first night in Seattle, they stayed in a hotel while Sarah finalized housing, arrangements that had been complicated by the need to find pet-friendly accommodations suitable for a family with a child. Emma fell asleep between Marcus and Sarah in the king-size bed, her body relaxed in a way that suggested comfort with their new configuration despite the unfamiliar environment. "No regrets?" Sarah whispered to Marcus as they listened to Emma's steady breathing. "Only that we waited 13 years to do this," Marcus replied. The house Sarah had found was a modest bungalow in a neighborhood that balanced urban amenities with suburban family friendliness. Emma's reaction was everything they had hoped: immediate excitement about the backyard, curiosity about the neighbors, and plans for how she would arrange her new bedroom. The space felt like home before they had even unpacked their first box. Emma's new school was a 15-minute walk through tree-lined streets that reminded her of their Ohio neighborhood while offering new discoveries around every corner. Her teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had been briefed about Emma's transition and worked to integrate her into established classroom routines while acknowledging the significance of her geographic adjustment. Marcus's professional networking began immediately, facilitated by Sarah's connections, but ultimately dependent on his own skills and reputation. Seattle's design community was competitive but collaborative, offering opportunities for freelancers who could demonstrate reliability and creativity. His portfolio, strengthened by recent projects, generated interest from potential clients who valued his combination of technical skill and artistic vision. The dog arrived 3 weeks after they had settled into their new routine. Emma had researched dog breeds with the thoroughness of a doctoral candidate, ultimately choosing a golden retriever puppy whose gentle temperament and intelligence made him perfect for a family experiencing significant change. Naming him Compass reflected Emma's understanding that he would help them navigate their new life direction. Sarah's new position demanded long hours and frequent travel, but she made deliberate efforts to maintain connection with Marcus and Emma through daily phone calls and weekend family activities. Her work was meaningful and challenging, utilizing her skills in ways that created positive change for families throughout the region. But her greatest satisfaction came from returning home to a family that provided emotional anchor points in the midst of professional demands. Marcus discovered that Seattle's creative community offered networking opportunities that had been unavailable in their smaller Ohio city. Coffee shops doubled as informal co-working spaces where freelancers shared resources and collaborated on projects. His income began to stabilize as he developed relationships with clients who valued long-term partnerships over one-off projects. Emma's adaptation surpassed everyone's expectations. Her new friends were impressed by her stories of cross-country relocation, and her teachers noted academic improvement that they attributed to increased emotional security. The combination of family stability and environmental novelty seemed to energize her in ways that static circumstances had not. 3 months after their arrival, Emma announced her intention to write a book about families that are created through choice rather than biology. Her teacher supported the project, recognizing its therapeutic value for Emma while acknowledging its potential interest for other children experiencing family transitions. It's going to be about how sometimes the best families are the ones you build yourself, Emma explained to Marcus and Sarah as they sat in their backyard watching Compass explore his territory. Like how we found each other and decided to be together. Marcus realized that Emma's book project reflected sophisticated understanding of their family's origin story. She recognized that their bond had been created through deliberate choices rather than biological inevitability, making their connection both more fragile and more intentional than traditional families. "What will you call it?" Sarah asked. "The family that delivered itself," Emma replied, demonstrating her understanding of the role that chance and choice had played in bringing them together. The title made Marcus smile as he remembered the confusion and hope he had felt when Sarah's food delivery had arrived at his door. That midnight moment of unexpected abundance had indeed delivered far more than Chinese takeout. It had delivered the family that none of them had known they were looking for. As autumn arrived in Seattle, bringing rain that felt like blessing rather than burden, Marcus found himself marveling at the strange mathematics of connection that had brought them to this place. Sarah's professional success was enabling her to impact hundreds of families while also nurturing the specific family she had chosen to create. Emma was thriving in ways that suggested their relocation had provided opportunities for growth that would benefit her throughout her life. Marcus's own sense of purpose had evolved beyond individual survival to encompass collective flourishing. His work provided financial contribution to their household, but more importantly, it allowed him to model for Emma the possibility of pursuing creative dreams while maintaining family responsibilities. Their partnership demonstrated that love could be both practical and romantic, that commitment could be both chosen and enduring. The wrong delivery had become the right foundation for a life that none of them could have imagined individually. As they prepared for their first Christmas together as a Seattle family, Marcus understood that some mistakes are actually invitations to discover possibilities that careful planning never could have created. Sarah's decision to reach out across 13 years of separation had delivered them all into a future that honored both professional ambition and personal connection, proving that the best families are indeed the ones that deliver themselves into being through courage, care, and the radical decision to believe that love is worth the risk of building a life around it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.